Breaking a bone isn't supposed to be a trivial matter, but in my case, it felt like it was. I remember distinctly the sharp pain, the hospital's white walls, and the busy nurses scurrying around. Amidst all this, I was supposed to magically appear at Samantha's wedding because, as my husband Brian insisted, it's just a broken bone, Rachel. You'll manage. His lack of concern for my well-being was painfully evident. I was still at the hospital when Brian dropped this bombshell on me. Be here in 3 minutes, he demanded over the phone, as if I could teleport out of my hospital bed. He showed zero empathy for my condition. That moment was a harsh revelation about whom I had really married. The last straw was when I finally confronted him in our living room, the light dimming around us as the sun set. As of now, I quit being your wife, I declared, my voice steady but my heart pounding fiercely in my chest. Caught off guard, Brian gasped, his face a mix of confusion and shock. This was my chance. I was done being overlooked and undervalued. I'll make him regret ever looking down on me, I thought fiercely. My name is Rachel. I'm 28 years old. Life hadn't been kind to me early on. I lost both my parents when I was in middle school. It was a devastating blow for a young girl. My older brother, Alexander, who was just in high school at the time, had to drop out to support us. He took on multiple part-time jobs, his life becoming a whirlwind of work and responsibility. Alexander has been with the same company for about 10 years now. He was scouted by Joseph, the company's CEO, who saw something in Alexander that he admired. Alexander always speaks of Joseph with deep respect, almost seeing him as a father figure, which was something we both desperately needed. 2 years ago, Alexander came home one day, his face serious yet slightly excited. Joseph wants to introduce his nephew to you, he said. I wasn't involved with anyone at the time, and given my brother's trust in Joseph, I was inclined to meet this nephew, thinking he must be a decent man. Brian, Joseph's nephew, was introduced to me shortly after. We went on a few dinner dates, and he was everything I thought he would be, considerate, friendly, and he seemed to genuinely adore his sister. His qualities reminded me of Alexander, which drew me to him even more. Without hesitation, I agreed to be his girlfriend, and a year later, we were married. However, 6 months into our marriage, I started to see the other side of Brian. It began subtly small demands, a slightly condescending tone, but the real shift happened when he told me about his sister Samantha's return home. He was overjoyed, practically bouncing off the walls with excitement. Samantha is coming back home, Brian had announced about a month ago, his eyes sparkling with anticipation. Since Samantha had been living in a neighboring state, her return was big news. She was to stay at her in-laws until her wedding day, and our home, being a short 15-minute walk from Brian's family house, was to be part of the festivities. The night before Samantha's return, Brian's tone changed. Samantha is coming home tomorrow. Get everything ready to welcome her, he ordered, as if I were an employee rather than his wife. Having left my job to focus on homemaking after our marriage, I understood that managing household chores was part of my daily routine, but his commanding tone was new and it irked me. Why was everything so rushed? Why was there no consideration for my feelings, or the fact that I was still dealing with the repercussions of a recent injury? His urgency and disregard were becoming all too clear. I'm sure Samantha's parents were also excited about her return, but the timing couldn't have been worse for me. Can't she come some other time? I muttered under my breath, knowing full well Brian's priorities. Samantha comes first for me, he stated coldly, his eyes void of any empathy. I married you to have you serve her. Now, you can finally fulfill that role. So, get to work. I was utterly speechless. His blunt words cut deep, and before I could gather my thoughts, he added another jab. Don't you dare complain to Alexander. If I ask Joseph, he can fire your precious Alexander in no time. You can't be serious. Do as you're told, and you don't have to worry. Got it? The threat was thinly veiled, his tone menacing. I felt a knot form in my stomach, devastation washing over me. Samantha, true to Brian's grim promise, treated me less like a sister-in-law and more like a servant. Any slight sign of displeasure on my part, and she'd threaten, "I'll tell Joseph," her smirk mirroring Brian's. Their threats left me no choice but to comply. She even started demanding money from me, leveraging her position mercilessly. Brian had audaciously told her, "If you need money, ask Rachel." So there she was, smugly commanding, "Cough it up, otherwise I'll tell Joseph you were mean to me." Cornered, I drew from the savings I had built up before our marriage and handed the money to Samantha. I couldn't burden Alexander, who had always been my pillar, the one who gave up so much for me. The only solace I clung to was that Samantha's stay was temporary. She was set to get married the day after the wedding ceremony and would then move to a new home in a different state. Just hang on until then, I kept telling myself, a mantra to get through each day. But the ordeal intensified. Just 3 days before Samantha's wedding, Brian casually demanded, "Prepare $10,000 as a wedding gift for Samantha." His words hit me like a ton of bricks. Shocked and angered, I blurted out, "What?" only to be met with his displeased expression. "Look, I don't mind if you don't want to, but if you don't listen, we're getting a divorce, and your brother's job is done for," he threatened, his voice cold and decisive. Before I could even respond, he doubled down, flaunting a signed divorce paper in front of me. "Hey, I can divorce you anytime, you know." In a fit of frustration, I snatched the paper from his hand, my eyes burning with anger. Despite my fierce glare, he remained defiant. "Go ahead, make my day. Divorce me, and you and your brother are doomed," he taunted, a cruel smile playing on his lips. Feeling utterly cornered and hopeless, I stormed out of the house, wandering the nighttime streets aimlessly. Why did it come to this? I thought, overwhelmed by a mix of despair and fatigue. As I attempted to navigate a pedestrian bridge, my mind a whirlwind of emotions, my foot slipped. Ah! Before I could even scream, the world seemed to spin out of control. I tumbled down to the ground below, the harsh impact with the cold pavement knocking me out instantly. When I regained consciousness, I found myself lying in a hospital bed, surrounded by the sterile, beeping environment. "Where am I?" I murmured, my voice hoarse and disoriented. My brother Alexander leaned into my line of sight, his face etched with deep concern. "Rachel, are you all right?" he asked, examining me closely as if trying to gauge the extent of my injuries with just his eyes. Confused and still reeling from the pain, I tried to piece together the events that led me here. Alexander gently explained that a passerby had found me unconscious under the pedestrian bridge and had promptly called an ambulance. The diagnosis was grim. I had fractured my leg and would need significant time to recover, including a lengthy period of hospitalization and rehabilitation. "Why were you out at that hour?" Alexander's voice broke through my fog of confusion. "Brian hasn't even visited you in the hospital. Did something happen between you two?" His genuine concern was palpable, and it was too much for my already frayed nerves. I broke down, tears streaming uncontrollably as the truth spilled out. "He only married me to use me," I sobbed. "He threatened to fire you, Alexander, if I don't obey. I wanted to protect you, but now he's demanding $10,000 for Samantha's wedding gift." My words were jumbled, overwhelmed by emotion, but Alexander understood enough. After a good cry, I began to regain some composure. Alexander's face was a mix of anger and resolve as he absorbed my story. "You didn't have to worry about me," he said softly, his anger subsiding into a protective resolve. "What I can't stand is seeing you hurting, Rachel. But thanks for having my back." He tapped the top of my head playfully, a gesture that, despite my nearly 30 years, brought a semblance of security. As I finished recounting everything to Alexander, my phone buzzed with a new message. It was from Brian. "Hospitalized, huh? Don't think that's getting you out of our wedding gift. Have $10,000 ready and come back now. Tomorrow's Samantha's wedding." His words, always so full of concern for Samantha and dismissive of my own well-being, ignited something fierce within me. Enough was enough. I was done putting up with this man. That very day, I left the hospital. With only my wallet, phone, and the divorce papers in hand, I laid the papers on the table and signed them without a moment's hesitation. Alexander offered to submit the papers for me and took it upon himself to update Joseph on the situation. Surprisingly, Joseph wasn't as harsh as I feared. He seemed almost indifferent to the family drama unfolding. Empowered by my newfound resolve, I answered one of the many calls from Brian I had previously ignored. His voice came through loud and angry. "Don't you dare ignore me," he shouted right off the bat, his temper flaring. "You planning on skipping Samantha's wedding? A fracture isn't that big a deal. Get over here in 3 minutes and bring the gift money." But this time I was ready to stand my ground. "No, Brian. I'm not coming, and you can forget about the money." His threats no longer held power over me. I was ready to face whatever came next, free from his manipulative grip. "I just quit being your wife," I declared firmly, cutting through Brian's bluster with a clarity I had never felt before. Caught off guard, he was momentarily speechless. "What do you mean quit? Stop this nonsense and get over here, or else I'll tell Joseph." I remained composed, feeling an inner strength bolstering my resolve. "I'm simply stating facts. We're divorced now, so no wedding and no gift. Want to tell Joseph? Go ahead. Your threats don't work anymore." Brian, clearly unnerved by my unexpected defiance, tried to "Don't mess around. Do you want Alexander to lose his job? Is that okay after all he did for you?" His words, meant to intimidate, now seemed so desperate. For too long, I had stayed silent, but not anymore. "Alexander won't be fired." "You will," I retorted, my voice steady. "Alexander already told Joseph you've been threatening me. Joseph is not happy with you." "That can't be. Joseph has been very fond of me. I was even fast-tracked into the company. There's no way he'd fire me," Brian protested, his voice a mix of disbelief and panic. "Believe what you want, but you'll find out soon enough," I said, sealing the conversation with a cold finality. "Are you at Samantha's venue? If you are, try finding Joseph." "I bet you can't. Your little scheme with your sister has already been reported. There's no way Joseph isn't livid. Not only are you getting fired, but Samantha's little scheme will also come to light. Have fun at the wedding," I added, letting the irony sink in. My ex-husband seemed incredulous, unable to fathom the turn of events. Now that I had nothing to fear, there was no need for me to be intimidated by him anymore. When I raised my voice, Brian responded with a surprisingly submissive tone. "Poor big brother of yours, quit high school just to support his sister, and now he'll lose his job because of that sister. You think an underdog like him can easily find another job? Even Alexander will start disliking you, you know. Don't call my brother an underdog. You're the real underdog here," I shot back, the anger in my voice palpable. "You sure you want to say that? I'm really going to fire him. Apologize now and bring me $1 million and you're off the hook. You're Samantha's personal servant after all. Bring me the $1 million now." I completely lost my cool with my condescending ex-husband. Forgetting I was still in the hospital, I shouted into the phone, "The one who needs to apologize is you." Stunned by my loud voice, Brian was left speechless. The tables had turned, and for the first time I felt truly emancipated from the oppressive shadow he had cast over my life. I didn't hold back. "I won't forgive you, even if you apologize. You're definitely getting fired, and as for your wedding, I bet none of your family will even show up. Joseph's been talking to everyone you know." Brian's reply was desperate. No way Joseph wouldn't do that. "Well, they aren't at the venue, are they? Maybe it's time to realize you and your sister have been written off. The whole family's disgusted with you. Shame. Even Samantha probably won't forgive you." Hearing this, Brian let out a cry that almost sounded like a scream. Why shouldn't he? Losing his servant of a wife, alienated by his family, and even potentially hated by his sister, he had every reason to scream. "I guess we're done here," I said to my ex, now presumably understanding the gravity of his situation. Enjoy your wedding, if it even happens. I hung up without waiting for Brian's response. After that, both Brian and Samantha called multiple times, but I ignored them. Eventually, they gave up and resorted to sending emails instead. Rachel, I was wrong. I won't call you a servant anymore. Please come back. Samantha's wedding will be ruined without you. Please attend and explain everything to Uncle. Rachel, I'm sorry, please forgive me. You don't have to bring $1 million, just bring $10,000 and come right away. I won't be able to have this ceremony, let alone register our marriage. Their emails still prioritized their wedding. At this point, I could only be flabbergasted. Samantha even saying $10,000 is fine. We're not family anymore. I sent the same message back to both of them. More calls and emails came, but I didn't respond. Sometime later, Alexander came to my hospital room. Following him was Brian's uncle, Joseph. As soon as Joseph locked eyes with me, he deeply bowed his head. My nephew really messed up. I'm truly sorry. I never thought he'd be such a person. Don't worry, it's not your fault, Joseph. Keep your head up, I reassured him, even as I felt a weight lifting off my shoulders. I fired Brian. From now on, both Brian and Samantha will get the cold shoulder from the entire family. I'll also talk to his father. I'm sure he'll discipline him, Joseph promised solemnly. Is that so? Finally, it's over, I muttered to myself, feeling a profound sense of relief. Just as Joseph had promised, Brian lost his job. Word has it that his job hunt is struggling, but that's no longer my concern. For the first time in what felt like forever, I felt truly relieved and free to start anew, no longer overshadowed by the manipulative schemes of my ex-husband and his sister. Brian had never really looked for a job before, his roles were always handed to him, a fact that became painfully obvious as he struggled to find employment after being fired. Meanwhile, Samantha, who faced pushback from all relatives, saw her wedding cancelled, just as expected. The fallout was harsh. Not only was their wedding cancelled, but they were also saddled with the cancellation fees. Soon after, they found themselves disowned by their parents, living in a cramped apartment with no one to turn to. Samantha blamed Brian almost daily, bitterly pointing out that this was all his fault. What was supposed to be a happy co-living arrangement with his beloved sister turned into daily agony for him. It seemed like just desserts for their actions. As for me, my life took a turn for the better. Thanks to Joseph's generous offer, I began working at the same company as Alexander. This new chapter allowed us to resume our lives together, just the two of us, living freely without any family interference. From now on, I plan to live a good life, supporting each other with Alexander. Working at the company was more than just a job, it was a fresh start, a chance to build a new reality based on respect and mutual support, far removed from the turmoil that had marred my previous life. Every day at work, I felt grateful for the opportunity to stand on my own feet, to prove to myself and to the world that I was capable of overcoming adversity. Life with Alexander in our modest but peaceful home was a daily reminder of what truly mattered: love, resilience, and the support of those who genuinely cared about us. We often talked about our future, about the lessons we'd learned from the hardships we'd endured, and about our hopes for a serene and fulfilling life ahead. As we moved forward, the shadow of the past receded, leaving behind a sense of triumph over the trials we had faced. It was a reaffirmation of our strength and an optimistic beacon for our future. As time passed, the routine of my new life became comfortably familiar. Each morning, Alexander and I would share breakfast, often discussing our plans for the day ahead or simply enjoying the quiet companionship. Going to work at the company where both Joseph and Alexander provided not just employment but also a sense of belonging and appreciation was incredibly fulfilling. It was a stark contrast to my life with Brian, where I felt undervalued and exploited. At work, I quickly adapted and found my niche. The environment was supportive, fostering my growth and confidence. I was involved in projects that challenged and intrigued me, and my contributions were recognized and valued. This positive reinforcement helped me rebuild the self-esteem that had been worn down during my marriage. Meanwhile, Brian's and Samantha's struggles served as a distant backdrop to our peaceful existence. Their situation was a constant reminder of the bullet I had dodged. Occasionally, news of their difficulties would reach us through mutual contacts, but it no longer had any impact on my emotional state. I had moved on, and their lives were no longer intertwined with mine. Alexander and I often spent our evenings planning future ventures or simply unwinding from the day's work. We had grown closer than ever, our bond strengthened by adversity and our shared commitment to each other's happiness. The pain of the past had transformed into a deep gratitude for our present and a hopeful outlook for our future. We also became more involved in community activities, volunteering at local events and supporting causes we believed in. This engagement with the community brought new friendships and connections, enriching our lives even further. As the seasons changed, so did our lives, evolving into a harmonious rhythm of work, community involvement, and personal growth. We were no longer just survivors of difficult times, but active architects of our joy and well-being. Finally, looking back on everything that had transpired, I felt a profound sense of closure and peace. The challenges had taught me about resilience, the importance of self-respect, and the unbreakable strength of familial bonds when forged in genuine care rather than obligation. Our lives had indeed changed, but so had we, growing into better versions of ourselves. And in this new chapter, with each other's support, Alexander and I were not just dreaming of a